Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. I get to indulge one of my special interests today, which is early childhood education, with the Aruna Gilbert, Chief Program and Policy Officer at the Early Learning Coalition. Aruna, welcome.
Thank you, Haley. What an honor to be here. I feel as though we know each other. I've been listening to your podcast and I feel as though we're best friends already.
Well, we have a lot in common, as we've already discovered on our welcoming call. One thing we have in common is that a dear colleague, Sunil Gundaria, introduced us. So have to call that out. Thank you to Sunil for making this introduction. We already feel like fast friends. I'm really excited to talk to you today, Aruna. I know that this is your life's work, your passion. It really intersects with your own special interests. Why don't you start us off by telling us, how did you come to be the personal and professional version of yourself?
Wow. So I would say that this started before I knew it, right? I have been, always has been an endlessly curious person. And I started my career actually in economics, believe it or not. So I was an economics major and had such a great privilege to work at the United Nations and worked in the United Nations Environment Program. And my first job was navigating a global youth forum. And there were youth from all over the world coming to talk about the environment. And I realized in that moment that education was the center of everything and learning was the center of everything. And quit my job, much to my mother's chagrin, and went on this journey of figuring out, what does education mean for me? Because it has a meaning for everyone and it's different in so many ways, but I wanted to find out, what was it for me? So I did everything. I was a beat reporter for education. I was a childcare teacher. I was a director. Um, I was well, I am a mom now, but I was an aunt before that and just did everything. And then I did a stint with the Department of Children and Families with looking at child welfare. I did therapy. I did all of it. And one day I'm sitting in my office in an elementary school being a behavioral health professional, and Florida decides that they're going to do voluntary pre-kindergarten. And it was a bolt of lightning that hit me that says, that's it. That's
Yeah.
what I want to do. I want to start where they start. And that was a pivoting moment that led me to the Early Learning Coalition just about 21 years ago. And I started this journey at the bottom of the totem pole because, shocker of all shocker, I had no education degree. I had
Well, you
none
were
of
a
those
career
things, right?
changer. Yeah.
Right? I had none of the rudimentary things that you need to do this job. And I started at the bottom as a specialist. And 21 years later, I'm their Chief Program and Policy Officer. And it has been an honor of my life to do this.
What a story. First of all, I have the deepest respect for career changers because who end up in education. I mean, other career changers, I guess they're okay, but those who end up in education are so deeply understanding that we need the best and the brightest in this field in order to affect change. So thank you for making that change yourself, because now look at the impact you have. How many kids' lives are you affecting on an annual basis? Do you have that number through your?
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. We serve about 40,000 children in subsidized childcare, but we hear from about 190,000 parents annually. So it's an enormous amount of time. And you know, Haley, before we even continue with me, I have to say something about you. When I saw the topic, the name of your podcast, Learning Can't Wait, I wanted you to know that that's something that really resonates with me. And learning can't wait because we know education is like compounding interest, right? But also educational neglect is compounding interest. And
Mm-hmm.
so that whole thing about learning can't wait really reminds us that we have to start as early as possible. And it goes all through, it's a lifelong process. So wanted to give you a shout out. That's an amazing, amazing name for a podcast.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. You know, not only do I think that the absence of quality learning opportunities for students is compounding, but I think it is even more pronounced for early childhood. So let's hear your expertise. 21 years of you being at this organization doing this work. You talked about the wide swath of students and families for whom you impact. What are you doing in this work, and how is this moving the needle for early learners and the practitioners who serve them?
Yeah, so, in the 20 something years I've been here, we really struggled with readiness for children. We were hovering in that 50, 60% readiness space and knew we needed to do something drastic because we know that birth to five space is so important, right? They're learning in new ways and they learn the most during that birth to five. And so we were really looking to be innovators and looking at education differently for young people, right? Especially our littlest ones. And that's how we met our good friend, Sunil Gundaria. He came along and told me about his product. And, you know, I have to say, as a lifelong learner myself, thinking about little ones and tablets and screen time, I had a lot of thoughts about that. And none of them positive, by the way. But one of the things that he said when he was talking to us about it was, in this product, it had the ability to tell you where children were starting their journey of learning. And it had the ability to tell you what they knew, what they had mastered, what was coming next, and what they didn't know at all. And it was an epiphany at that moment when I realized that when we think of early learning educators, they don't have the sorts of assessment tools and maybe educational background to really understand assessing children's trajectory for learning. They're generally casting a really wide net and hoping they catch as many fish as possible. This tool offered us an opportunity to not only accelerate children's learning, but also to kind of take a look back and give teachers something they didn't have before, right? They were now able to get data at any given point in time to say, oh, this is what this kid knows. Oh, when I did that, this child understood this. And if they didn't know, they had the data, but they didn't know what to do about the data, we have coaches that are going to go in and help them and do that. So looking at innovative ways of making sure children were learning in their sweet spot,
Mm.
not in ours, but in theirs, because the driver is the child. We often look at the ecosystem of a child and wonder, we're changing all these things that are specific to the child, but leaving the ecosystem the same.
Mm.
And so it was to flip that on its head and change the ecosystem so that the child flourishes in that sweet spot. And Age of Learning certainly gave us the opportunity to do that. So that spawned looking at learning, early learning, how we deliver early learning education when it comes to the parent, the teacher, the child, the partnership, everybody around them, the community that makes learning happen, right? To raise this child in this space of having high literacy and ready for school and ready for life. So that piece of innovation really spawned lots of different things. It had lots of different arms because the product was just the accelerator. 15 minutes a day is all we're using it for. 15 minutes a day, and we saw 80% of the children using it hit our readiness rates and above. But we saw more than that. We also saw teachers understanding their role in the learning process and parents understanding their role in the learning process. And so that's magic for me.
Oh my goodness, is it ever? It takes a village is a saying that a lot of folks say in education, but I think it is profoundly true for early childhood. Let's talk a little bit about our early childhood educators. You have a specific your work is specifically attending to the women in early childhood education, often, as you say, underrepresented populations in our communities. How does this and how does the preparation we provide for early childhood learning, early childhood educators equip them to be maximally impactful? And also, I will name that our society does not typically uphold and respect and revere underrepresented women, populations of women. So, what are we doing to combat that? And how do you think we can be better on behalf of these really precious early childhood educators?
Yeah, I think you can go all the way back, right, to the war on poverty, all the way back when women always carried the mantle, right? Always carried the mantle for moving society forward. Um, Stepping in when men couldn't be here to work, stepping in when moms needed to get in their working field and children needed to be cared for. And so I think that, we all know that early learning really sits on the backs of women. And one of the things that, I believe is missing is the care and time that we take to educate our early learning educators to be confident in the way they do their jobs and the way they teach and in the way they can deliver the work. We all know that what they do really, really well is nurture children, right? They are that substitute mom in a classroom. But they're more than babysitters, and we need to acknowledge that. And the way to acknowledge that, I believe, is to provide adequate information, data, education, and support. These folks are working all day long and going home and tending to their families. And so it is a heavy load. Um, we saw the result of what happens when these women leave the workforce during the pandemic, right? And specifically in Palm Beach, we were looking at closing about 136 classrooms. And we were reeling from that because where do children go? Our schools were closed. The only place that was open were childcare facilities. Not only did they need to attend to birth to 5 children, but now our school agers needed somewhere to go to school as well. So we did something that was quite extraordinary, actually. I believe it's quite extraordinary. We have a program that we called Aspire. And we went into neighborhoods that had neighborhood childcare sites and said to the childcare, who are the parents in your neighborhood that are always showing up for your site, right? And maybe they're not working. So what are they doing? And so we went out and got those moms, and they weren't working. And because they weren't working, not eligible for childcare. What we did was a two-pronged approach, looked at workforce innovation and at the same time, childcare. So hiring moms to come in and be childcare teachers, which now made them eligible for childcare, but also gave an opportunity for us to structure from ground up how we educate that provider, that childcare teacher, to become an early learning educator. And so we did all of the things, right? We worked with Palm Beach State College, our Children's Services Council, to pay for the CDA, which is the credential for childcare educators, all the way up to now they can get a master's degree for free. If you work in our childcare sites, you can do that. To date, we've hired 330 childcare providers.
Wow.
But hiring them isn't enough, right? It's what you do when you get them. To hold on to childcare providers means, I think, Haley, if you look at your job, my job, the purpose under which we do this job is not to take a paycheck home, though that is certainly something, right? But
Sure.
the reason we're doing it is we're driving our passion.
Right.
Right? We're moving and driving our passion. That is no different for the early learning educator making $10, $12 an hour.
Right.
They have a passion. It's something that drove them to this space, and they want to stay in this space. And we have to honor and support that, right? To make sure that that stays. And so the secondary piece is coaching, making sure that we're not teaching visual learners in an auditory way. So they're not the people who are going to sit in a classroom and you just talk at them.
Mm.
You've got to give them tangible ways of carrying that theoretical piece into practice. And so we have many coaches doing that as well. So bringing all of it together so we're supporting that workforce.
I mean, it sounds like a utopia for early childhood.
I hope so.
So, do you have any longitudinal data on how this work and these changes are impacting student graduation rates, student performance, and attrition in schools? Like, is that yet available or not quite?
Not quite. So early learning still struggles with data, right? Data in early learning is still a struggle. Now, through our Age of Learning products, we are able to see how children are starting in that 4-year-old space and ending. So we can see how they move, and that tells us a little bit about how teachers are moving. If the kid's moving, teacher's moving, right? We're starting to look at our professional development, and we use a tool, the Teachstone class assessments, to
Hmm.
see how those interactions are happening in the classrooms. And I can tell you that this year, for the first time in 21 years, 90% of our educators, our preschool classrooms, are meeting expectations or above. Um, just about 85 to 90% of them are hitting that 5.3 average in a class score, which is high quality. Um, and 72% of our children are ready for school.
That's amazing.
So we are seeing that, but there's a longer runway to see that longitudinal. We accept responsibility for the fact that we are in a county as well in our high school and highest
Mhm.
graduation rates. We accept that responsibility because we know it all starts with early learning.
Yeah, of course, of course. No, and my push is always like, what data do we have for the long term? Because we, the work I do now, the work I've done when I was in schools, brick and mortar schools, I always am proud of, and I always want to know like what's the long term impact of that? Because our country is woefully unprepared to radically reform education. And so the micro spots of radical transformation give me a lot of hope. And you are
Yeah.
definitely providing that, which is like very exciting to observe.
Yeah, I think that, my new sweet spot lately has been remembering that learning is relationship based
Mm,
and really looking at that. I'm also a therapist, I'm a social worker by trade as well now. So looking at how children learn through relationships and how that drives that really solid foundation, drives and accelerates a child. So that's kind of a sweet spot that I'm starting to look at to see if I put those pieces together, what happens?
mm. It reminds me of another one of Sunil's good friends, Isabel Howe, and her book Love to Learn,
One of
which,
my favorite books,
right? It wasn't it amazing?
really, truly.
I mean, the research that she poured into that text and the just emphasis on relationships. I remember, I'll tell a quick story to you. I remember when I first came to Full Mind, it was then called iTutor, and I introduced every single session had to begin with rapport building. And that was like part of the framework of how education should look at Full Mind, right? That was like what the schools I thought wanted. But at that time, there was so much pushback. Wait, what do you mean your teachers are going to spend 5 to 10 minutes getting to know kids at the beginning of class? Like the kids are really far behind. They have to jump into the content. And I said, no, they don't. They actually have to jump into getting to know kids because then the kids will attend classes more frequently. They'll feel a connection to their educator. And then I read this book from Isabel Howe, and I said, Isabel, I just wish this book came out 8 years ago so I could point everybody to it when I was trying to implement a new system for education.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I loved about that book is that intersection that she has between the relationship part, but she grounds it in data. And those two things, it became something that you can't say, oh, it's all flowery and fluffy and butterflies, right? No, she grounds it in data, and she grounds it in such a great perspective that it was like, aha. The
Right?
social work in me was like, that's it.
I love that. I love that. What's coming up for this calendar year that has you really excited? I mean, calendar year being that Florida schools already began.
Yes.
So But are your early childhood centers year round or they run on a school calendar?
They're year-round or voluntary pre-kindergarten. We have universal voluntary pre-kindergarten, and that runs on typically on the school year. We do have a summer program as well, but our childcare sites are open year-round.
Makes sense. What has you excited though for this coming school year starting now?
Yeah, this is the first year we really have so much data, and it's so exciting. So taking all of that data and making sure that we equalize education no matter where a child sits. That's my goal for this year, is making sure that whether you sit in a school district, a childcare center, a Head Start, I've got you, we're moving forward.
That's so cool. If data could be the center of all of our conversations around kids, I think we'd be a lot better off.
Oh, absolutely.
You
I
know,
mean, no doubt.
No doubt. Aruna, you have such a breadth of experience. I'm wondering if the different path you took to this work here today, how you feel it informed your actions. And even, you mentioned a few moments ago, you were making some comments about financial and all the background you have. How have you woven it together? And what do you hope that the next skill that you acquire, since you seem to be just collecting different degrees along the way?
I am. So you're going to be the first to let my secret out of the bag, but I am going for my doctorate in social work.
Oh my goodness,
So
congratulations.
thank you. So it really is a moment where I'm thinking about how do I use all of that relationship stuff? How do I use what I know is a return on investment for children and in return on investment for our future, right? How do I put all of those things together to revolutionize the way we look at learning and education? And so that's my goal. Check back in 3 years because I hope to do it in three
Amazing.
years. So check back in 3 years, see where I wind up.
Oh my goodness, what an exciting for the record, listeners, I had no idea. I didn't have any prior knowledge of this information. I was just curious because when you meet a forever learner, you just know that they're
Yeah.
continually chasing more knowledge. And I think that attribute is so aspirational. And it's what I want my kids to have. I want my kids, whether or not it comes with a degree, but I just want them to be curious about the world. I think that value, other than empathy, is just the most important value. And so the fact that you exemplify that, and I just anticipated some new learning that you were going for, it just cracks me up.
I've kept that for a secret for a very long time. But
Well, you heard it here first.
absolutely.
Amazing. Aruna, this has been such a rich conversation and your passion really shines through for your work. I'm wondering what advice you would give an early childhood educator who's starting their career today.
Well, the first thing I would say is that you're absolutely essential, that you are the essential piece to all of our future, right? Um, I would say stick with us. Stick with us. I know that change has been slow and long coming, but it is coming. And stick with us. This is the start of everything. And this space is so worth it.
Amazing. Aruna, thank you so much for breaking the news about your coming doctoral degree and also for sharing your wisdom and your passion with our audience. It's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast today.
Thank you, Haley.
And thank you to everybody for tuning in.